So back to Daniel, and it's been a while, a couple weeks since we've been in the book, but you remember chapter 1. I mean, thus far we know that Daniel and his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what are their Hebrew names? Anybody can tell me that without looking?
Absolutely not.
Azariah, Mishael, and what's the other one?
Indigo.
Well, that's the Babylonian name. So their names in the Babylons renamed them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they were originally what? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they came, and they were just, these were four, Daniel and his three buddies there, those are just four of many young men that were taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. And we've been looking at that, and what have we been looking at? The main example of Daniel's obedience to God and to his Jewish faith. What has Daniel done so far in this new culture that we've been focusing on? Where's the real test come from so far? The food. Yeah, the diet. Because these young men, and we know these were the cream of the crop. These young men that initially were carried off around 605 BC were some of the very best. Some of the royalty. They were in the lines of the family lines of the royal in Jerusalem, and they're carried off to Babylon, and they were placed into a 3-year training program. It was basically the University of Babylon, and it was a 3-year training program. And part of this was that they were assigned a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. And we know Daniel, was not able to partake in those things. Why? Yeah, they weren't kosher, and it would have violated the Jewish law. So, he took a stand, and we read that he purposed in his heart, or he resolved not to do so. And so what was Daniel's proposal to the king, or the king's chief official? How could he try to circumvent having to partake in the foods and the drink offered by the king? What was Daniel's proposal?
Vegetables and water.
Yeah, give us a test of 10 days on this vegetable diet. And the word for vegetable, of course, includes grains and other things like that. That was the Hebrew word. Wasn't just vegetables as we think of them. It would include grain, but it would not include the meats and things that were not kosher or that had been offered to idols that Daniel knew he could not eat. And so there was a brief back and forth. The chief official and the guards were worried because they were feared if the king, Nebuchadnezzar, found out that they would be killed. If Nebuchadnezzar found out that they were allowing these men to avoid eating of the king's food and drink, that he might kill them. But they agreed to try it. And then at the end of the 10 days, what was the result?
They were better off than they were before.
Yeah, they looked better than any of the other young men. Verse 15 of chapter 1 says, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. So sounds like at that point they just made it permanent. And so Daniel took a stand for God, and it paid off. Now I want to try to push through this so we can at least get to chapter 2. So verse 17, to these 4 young men God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. So what's that tell us? Beyond just their physical appearance, which we know was flourishing, they were doing well, they looked strong, they were healthy. How else is God showing favor and blessing these young men?
Preparing them mentally.
Yeah, mentally, intellectually. It says he's giving them knowledge and an understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And again, what kind of a program are they in right now? They're taking far, far away from their home, everything they've ever known. They are probably 15, 16 years old, and they're put in this 3-year program of Babylonian culture. And there was a lot. You know, there are still a lot of things that we do today that came from Babylon. Do you know that? No? Such as, well, and I had it written down. I don't know where it's at. So I was hoping you would know. But actually, it is. Let me just find this real quick, because
Can you remember one or two?
I do remember one or two. Like our measures, so 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. All of those systems come from Babylonian systems. So we still use those. It's called a base 60 system that comes from Babylon. 360 degrees to a circle comes from Babylon. A lot of our, and I hate this, but algebra, trigonometry, geometry, a lot of those things come from Babylon. Much of our legal system, I should have at least remembered that, comes from, but truly it's been a month since I did this because we had these weeks off, so I did forget some of these. But yeah, the Code of Hammurabi, you know, the laws being written down and publicly applying to all, innocent until proven guilty. A lot of these concepts came from Babylon. The 12-month calendar, 7-day week, all come from Babylon. And there are many others. And you know, when we got to the end of, you know, really the Tower of Babel, you remember the Tower of Babel? That at that point, this area over here became the first real world power. I mean, at that point. And then, of course, we know Assyria rose to be a world power, where Babylon was just more of a city within the Assyrian Empire until Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, around 626 BC, conquered Assyria, and then Babylon became the world power. But at the end of Revelation, you know, I think it was Revelation 17 and 18 when we talked about a lot about Babylon. There's a reason why Babylon is used either literally or figuratively for so many of these systems in the world. A lot of the occult practices come from, and when we get to chapter 2, we're going to talk about these enchanters, sorcerers, Chaldeans, these people that use occult, or, you know, like the magic or the astrology, you know, trying to read the stars and worshiping the stars. A lot of the occult practices originated in Babylon. So there are so many things, but this is what Daniel was all of a sudden thrust into. Dale, yes?
Do you think that that's where a lot of people's superstitions come from today?
Absolutely. Zodiac, the horoscopes, you know, all those sorts of things. A lot of that originated in this Babylonian culture and has continued to today. So, and it's satanic. So yes, I do believe that is where a lot of that comes from. Anyway, this is what Daniel and his buddies were suddenly thrust into in this pagan culture, and they're having to learn a lot of these Babylonian things. Now, it wasn't all bad, you know, learning the mathematical systems and the legal systems and all that. Some of that came to benefit Daniel probably as he rose to prominence. But he was able to do that without ever compromising his faith in God. And we read all of their knowledge, their understanding, and all the literature and the learning came from God. And then we read Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. And that's going to become important, is it not? Daniel's ability to understand visions and dreams, how's that going to become important to Daniel?
it'll elevate his position to be the highest in Babylon minus being underneath the king.
Yeah, we're going to see that in chapter 2. I mean, Daniel's going to interpret this dream of King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's not. God's going to, but God's going to use Daniel to do that. And as Jonathan said, that's going to elevate Daniel's position to being right underneath the king. Nebuchadnezzar ultimately is going to make Daniel second in command. He's going to be the head of all the wise men in Babylon. Now, what's interesting about that is, you know, when Jesus was born, I thought I was going to lose my Bible. Who came to visit Jesus and bring gifts when Jesus was a baby? Magi. Who are the Magi?
Wise men.
Up that area.
From the east, up that area, as Cookie. Over there, over yonder. The Magi came from, what's the Bible say? The east. And these Magi, or sometimes called wise men, right? They come from over here. Now, Daniel becomes the head of the wise men 500 or 600 years before Jesus is born, right? How do you think the wise men in the east knew that there was going to be a child coming born king of all the Jews?
Daniel.
Well, Daniel, don't we get in Daniel, throughout the book of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, you know that thing we used to have written up here for ages where Daniel chapter 9 gives a precise, Daniel was able to, through this vision, the angel came to Daniel and explained to him what that vision meant, which actually gave him the exact time that Jesus was going to come. Do you remember that? You think Daniel shared that with the other wise men and magi and people in Babylon when he was there, knowing his fate? Yes. So, I've never really had thought about this a whole lot. But those wise men, those magi from the east that came visiting baby Jesus, do you think that Daniel's impact and influence in Babylon several centuries earlier could have had something to do with why those wise men they knew?
They were his pupils.
Well, they would have been several generations removed, but yes, I mean, oral and written records would have existed. I mean, we know, we've got the book of Daniel, which was preserved and copied into Greek ultimately in the Septuagint. There were records. The book of Daniel existed, so these people would have read this. I never really thought about it, but next time you hear the story of the wise men or the magi from the east, think about Daniel, who was the head of the magi for a time. Now, a lot of the magi were cronies, and we're going to see that. I mean, they were fraud. They practiced the occult, satanic. You think Daniel changed that culture when he became, or tried to change that culture when he became head of the magi? Yeah, he did. So just think about that. Now, in verse 18, there it says, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them in. When do you think that was?
In the 3 years.
I think that's probably at the conclusion of the 3 years. So they have to come in and, they get their exam here to see how their progress has been. It says the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. None were equal to them. How does that happen? How do you think these 4 young men rose to the top of the class? God. What was said back here? Yeah, God ordained. It was the favor of God was upon them. We know that. I mean, it told us previously that God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. It was the favor of God. The king Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed with them that they entered into his service. And then in verse 20, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So and you got to think, how old are these boys at this point?
19.
Probably 18, 19 years of age, because they were likely 15 or 16 when they came. And it's a 3-year program. So none in the whole kingdom could compare. Now that's something. I mean, that says something. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, what's that mean? Daniel remained there until King Cyrus. What's that? Why is that there? What's that tell us? Who's King Cyrus, first of all? 539 BC. Yeah, somebody said successor. Is he the successor to Nebuchadnezzar? He's actually from a completely different kingdom. So King Cyrus was the head of the Medo-Persian Empire. It's said that Cyrus, his parents, one was Mede, one was Persian. So that's how the kingdoms sort of combined. The Medo-Persian Empire is a combination of these two different kingdoms. Cyrus was the original king that took over when the Medo-Persian Empire conquered the Babylonian Empire. In what year? 539 BC. So, what happened is, when Nebuchadnezzar first sieged Jerusalem, so you remember there were 3 sieges of Jerusalem that occurred. Nebuchadnezzar, when did Nebuchadnezzar first conquer Jerusalem and take Daniel and his buddies back?
I thought it was 605.
605 BC-ish. And what was happening was Nebuchadnezzar at that point was not the king of Babylon. He was a top general in his father's military. Nebuchadnezzar's dad was the king of Babylon at that time, 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar's dad, anybody know his name? You got it. Huh?
I don't know how to pronounce it.
That's what it is.
Nabopolassar.
Nabopolassar, yes. Nabopolassar was the king. He was the one that was the king of Babylon as a city. Nabopolassar conquered the Assyrians in 626 and ruled until 605. Nebuchadnezzar was a general who actually had been down defeating Egypt. He was down here fighting Egypt, and on his way back through, just happened to, had nothing better to do, so he stops and attacks Jerusalem. And that's when he carried these young men off. The legend is that around the time Nebuchadnezzar was there in Jerusalem in 605, he found out his dad, Nabopolassar, had died. So he rushes back home to Babylon to take the throne officially in 605. Now, chapter 2 is going to begin, it's going to say, in the second year of his reign. So we're just going to call him Nebi here for short. Takes the throne officially what year? 605 BC. So what would be the second year of his reign?
603. 603.
Okay. So the way this actually goes is they do not count the year you accede to the throne, the Babylonian system of counting. And this is a difference. There are different systems of counting. So when you read, a lot of times in the Bible, you notice it'll say in the second year of, or in the third year of, and so on and so forth. The Jews counted those things differently than the Babylonians did. Babylonians never counted the year you actually come to the throne as a year. So if he came to power at some point in 605, that would not count. His first year wouldn't really have started running until 604. That makes sense? So the first year of his reign would have been 604 to 603. The second year would have been 603 to 602. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it is conceivable that while these young men came back to Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar took the throne in 605, second year of his reign actually would have ran until sometime in 602. Okay? So why that's important is because when we get to the second chapter, and that last verse of the first chapter tells us Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel's going to become Is he okay, Jeff?
Yeah, he's going up front, waiting on church to be over.
Okay. Daniel remains in power, not just in the Babylonian kingdom. He rises to the same comparable position in the successive kingdom, the Medo-Persian Empire. Do you realize that? Daniel continues to serve even under King Cyrus in the next regime, not just Babylonian kingdom, the Medo-Persian. And that last verse there, Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Does that mean Daniel, at that point during the first year of King Cyrus, does that mean that Daniel is all of a sudden out? No, it doesn't mean he's out, because chapter 10 verse 1 says, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel. So he's still there doing things in the third year of Cyrus. So that last verse of chapter 1 just means Daniel continued in his position even into the next kingdom. He continues to serve even under King Cyrus in the Medo-Persian Empire.
Basically, he trained for 6 years.
What's that?
He
6
trained
years?
an extra 3 years.
Well, I don't know if he had to train an extra 3 years. This is all, so the Medo-Persian Empire didn't conquer Babylon until 539 BC, which is how many years after this? Like 65, yeah, a bunch. So Daniel, for the next 60 plus years, serves Babylon and then goes over into the next kingdom as well and continues to serve. We believe Daniel died in Babylon probably sometime, past the age of, if he was 15 or so when he came in,
80.
he serves out the whole 70 years. That was the Babylonian captivity.
90.
Probably 90 years old, because I believe Daniel died in Babylon. He never came back to Jerusalem. Yes, Ron.
So why would this be God's will for Daniel? What's the bigger purpose?
Well,
Just something goes to my mind. Question.
God's will, first of all, what was God's will in the Jews being in Babylon in the first place? It was a disobedience led to discipline and punishment. So that's why the Jews were carried off to Babylon for 70 years anyway. Now, why was Daniel specifically used? Well, what do we get from the fact that Daniel was in Babylon for 70 years? The book of Daniel. We read all this about God's favor being on Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, but and how God gave them, obviously physical appearance, stature, strength, wisdom, understanding. It's easy to look at all that and say, man, these guys are lucky. How blessed, God made them the smartest, the best looking, and how fortunate are they? But you got to think, are they really were their circumstances really that good? No, not necessarily. God is using them through a very difficult time, through a discipline process.
And isn't it also like a story of deliverance? Daniel and his friends were delivered from the everyday routine captivity, and God delivered Daniel from the lions. He delivered his friends
From the furnace, the fiery furnace.
the fire.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of deliverance within the story, yeah, but overall, their situation, just like Joseph before them, was sold off by his brothers into Egyptian bondage. And then God somehow uses Joseph in Egypt, in his situation, to rise him up to become the prime minister of Egypt under Pharaoh. Not a great situation initially for Joseph, but because Joseph was obedient to God throughout, God used him and showed favor upon him. And so what do we get from Joseph's life? What did God do through Joseph's story of being sold into bondage in Egypt? What did God bring out of that?
What was meant for evil, God uses for good.
Well, yeah. What men meant for evil, God used for good. And what was the good that came from Joseph's story?
I mean, ultimately, saved his family.
Saved the whole family. The whole family, when there was a famine in Israel, went down to Egypt, found food because their long-lost brother Joseph was there. Ultimately, the whole family goes down there and becomes the nation of Israel. And that's how God raised up his chosen people. Daniel similarly carried off into Babylonian captivity, away from his family, friends, everything that was familiar. Daniel remained faithful, and God showed favor and blessed him in a what would be a bad situation in order to bring about probably the most important book of prophecy in our entire Bible, as we're getting ready to see. And now, why couldn't God have just done that? Why couldn't God have just blessed Daniel and given him the same vision, prophecy in Israel? Why couldn't he have done that? He could have. Why didn't he? Would it have had the same impact? I mean, him being sent off, just like Joseph, into a foreign land, and because of his obedience, a pagan culture, people see that. How many lives do you think Joseph affected in Egypt? How many lives do you think Daniel? We just talked about the Magi from the east coming, bringing the gifts to Jesus. Why did they do that? Maybe because of the impact that Daniel had on those people there. I don't know why God always chooses to do things the way he does. And the fact that he continues to use these people. Did he use Paul when Paul was in prisons? And could he have just used Paul and never had Paul sent to prison? Yes. Why do a lot of Paul's letters come from prison? Yeah, but why? Why couldn't Paul have given us the same? We could pick up our Bible and read the same things and not read about Paul being in chains.
Just like us going to the bars, you don't have to go there just to partake. You can go there to share the word and just to be a light in a dark spot.
But would it have the same impact if Paul was never placed in chains and writing messages of joy and praise from prison cells?
So is God testing his faith?
Testing. It's a test. I mean, Daniel, I don't know that it would have the same impact. If we read this story and it was not Daniel and his friends, young men, withstanding the pressures that they were suddenly placed under, would his testimony be the same? You know, God uses trials to bring testimony. And he does it with Joseph and Daniel and Paul and all the apostles and us, every day of our lives. The question is, how are we going to respond to those trials? Cheryl.
Well, I was thinking, because if you're free and you're having a pretty good life and you're preaching or whatever, like, some of the people who are downtrodden are going to be like, well, look where you're at. But if, no matter where you are, if somebody is like in prison and suffering or oppressed or whatever, but they're still keeping the faith joyful and happy and spreading the word and praying for you, regardless of their circumstances, it's going to make an impact.
The testimony is stronger when it's under trial. I mean, absolutely. So, we're about out of time. And just so I can say I did finish this chapter. So it tells us Daniel's longevity. He's going to extend all the way out into the next empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. Chapter 2 is going to bring us this amazing story about Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king's dream. And again, I don't think this story God wouldn't have been able, God can do anything, but God knew the impact of this story is greater when it's the pagan ruler of the world. I mean, he was the most powerful, Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man in the world at this point. And the fact that he's going to have these dreams, or it's a dream, the Hebrew language really seems to indicate that probably Nebuchadnezzar was having multiple dreams So when we read at the beginning of chapter 2, in the second year of his reign, which was probably sometime down here, and if Daniel had been here since up here, how many years from here to here?
2.
Well, 605 to 602. So if Daniel came in sometime in 605, and this range, the second year of Nebuchadnezzar would be 603 to 602, you can see how it could have been 3 years, right? What do we know Daniel had to, the end of chapter 1, he's just completed what? His 3-year training program. So I believe the math works. That's why I did this, because it seems like the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he starts having these dreams that are causing him all sorts of angst. He can't sleep because of these dreams that he's having, and he needs to know, what is the interpretation of this dream that I keep having? He's going to end up looking to Daniel, who is a fresh graduate at best, right? I mean, Daniel's either just graduated from this 3-year training program, or he's right at the cusp of it. So he is one of the most inexperienced, youngest in the entire court of the king at this point. And he's the one that God's going to use, Daniel, ultimately to reveal to the king the meaning of this dream. And by the way, this dream that Nebuchadnezzar's had, that Daniel's going to interpret, is it important?
Yeah.
We've talked about it, and right here it is. Visions in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. It's the statue. We talked about it when we were doing Revelation. So for a lot of you, this is going to be a review, but that's good, because I think it probably takes more than once to really grasp what's going on in Daniel chapter 2. But those of you that remember, what's the significance of Nebuchadnezzar's dream? What is it? The statue represents what?
The rise and fall of empires leading to the coming of Christ.
All the way from, the rise and fall of empires leading to the coming of Christ. So, pretty important, isn't it? I mean, the times of the Gentiles that Jesus spoke of would be the time that the Jews are being trampled on by the Gentiles. It began with Nebuchadnezzar and Jerusalem, and it's going to extend out to the return of Christ. And this dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the interpretation that Daniel's going to give him, is going to be
What?
all empires from the time of Nebuchadnezzar to the return of Christ. That's pretty significant. Could that have happened? Could God have brought that to us if Daniel wasn't in Babylon serving with this pagan king?
No.
He could have in some other way if he chose to, but would it have? This is how God chose to do it. So, the Jews were there for a reason, discipline, punishment for 70 years. Daniel being one of them. But while Daniel's there in that situation, God's going to use him powerfully. Why does God use Daniel and show favor upon Daniel? Yeah, because he's one after his heart, which is, often what's said of King David. But also, he was, what'd you say? He was willing, he was faithful, he trusted, and he was obedient. He didn't sell out, he didn't compromise, even as a young teenage male in that culture. All right, that's probably good for today. We did make it into chapter 2, so that's progress. There's only 12 chapters in Daniel, so, we'll get through it in
1 year.
year or two. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity. And it's good that we can have some fun and we can laugh, but we are also serious, and we understand the seriousness of your word. And as we study the book of Daniel, we know that all your word, our entire Bible, Old Testament and New, is inspired by you. We know that you use, as Jason said this morning, over 40 human hands. Over a period of a couple thousand years, multiple continents, you used to bring forth your word. But it's all inspired by you, and it's all important to us. But the book of Daniel, we know, it's filled with your prophecy of things yet to come, things that have happened, but also things that have yet to happen. And we know that by studying it, we can learn to have confidence in your word, because we see where things that you've said would happen happened exactly as you said they would. And we can have confidence that things in the future will happen as you say they will. And it's exciting, and we can have fun studying it. And I pray that we don't just use it to have additional knowledge, but we can truly use this to go out and tell people who you are and who Jesus is. And I love this class. Those that are not here, those that are sick and hurting and recovering, I pray your healing hand will be upon them. Those that are facing upcoming surgeries and procedures, I pray you'll be with them. And just be with all, Father. Be with each and every one of us as we go from here today. Keep us safe and healthy until we meet again. And we pray all of these things in the precious name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
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 All right. God bless you all.
Again.